Can I still find a provider husband and marry later in life? I want to pursue a career first and eventually become a homemaker. Babe, you can find and attract a provider husband at any age, okay? Your age has absolutely nothing to do with your ability to draw in a quality provider guy. And you do not have to put yourself on a timeline to rush to the altar, okay? Sometimes you can get so caught up and consumed in what all of your friends and family are either saying or what they're doing for themselves and with their lives. And if they're getting married and having kids really young, right? But you don't have to follow a timeline for yourself. You don't have to set this certain time frame for you to rush to the altar and commit your entire life to someone. The only time you have more restrictive boundaries around on a time frame is whenever you want to have kids, right? Obviously, because we have a biological clock that is ticking, and so when we want to have kids healthily, we do have to have them before a certain age, right? But normally, when you have that calling to become a mom, you will know pretty early on, and you will try to create a manifestation of a reality where you are able to become a wife and become a mom, and just do that as your vocation. And guess what? If you don't want to have kids and you don't think that is your calling, then you have even more time on your hands. You're at an advantage because you have even more time to pursue what you want to pursue and pursue your goals and build your business or whatever it is that you are called to do. And then put marriage on the back burner, right? Maybe right now you don't want that, but later on in life you will want to feel more settled. You'll want to have more companionship in your life and in your home life, right? And that's okay. You have all the time in the world as long as you're alive to attract and draw in your provider husband. The only thing that I always like to emphasize here, as I always have from the very beginning of my content, is that as we progress more in the career world and progress more in this corporate America or whatever, wherever you're from, right? In this capitalized society, I should say, the more that us women progress further and further into that, the more that we really establish our masculine qualities, all of those qualities that come from our more masculine side of us, right? We inevitably will we inevitably will become more comfortable and set in our ways the further that we establish ourselves in that. So the more financial success that we have, the more independence, the more sovereignty that we have, the more set in our ways that we become in our home life, and what we do in our routines and our day-to-day basis. All of those ways that we live our life as independent single women, that can get really hard to kind of step out of once you move into a more integrated life, sharing your life with someone. And so that's always something to really keep in the back of your mind too, because it doesn't have to hinder your ability to be a feminine woman with your provider masculine husband, but it's just something to always remember and be mindful of and keep practicing, because it can, if you're not mindful of how you're becoming so independent and driven and kind of just used to taking care of everything yourself and providing fully for yourself, then it can affect it, but it doesn't have to if you choose for it not to and you stay mindful of that. And in this day and age, you are just bound to have a more modern, traditional relationship, as I like to call it, because you are probably going to be both working outside of the home. Obviously, if you have kids, that's a whole different ball game. That's a different situation on whether you should or not. But yeah, especially like if it's just you and your partner, then you are probably going to be working outside of the home, pursuing something, some kind of business, some kind of endeavors. And that is perfectly okay. And that's perfectly healthy, because you need to have a life where you are doing your own thing and, involved in your own community, involved in your own activities, involved in your own hobbies and means of generating skills, talents, income for yourself, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Remember this, to all my ladies, that this is the one of the biggest messages I have always been preaching since I started this content, is that your value is not determined by whether you have a spouse or whether you don't have a spouse, whether you are single, whether you are partnered up with someone, whether you have kids, whether you don't have kids. That has absolutely nothing to do with your integrity and your value as a person, as a whole human being. I get it that people just expect, because this is the norm, right? People expect you to do the norm thing and marry and have kids, right? That is most people's calling. That's great. Okay? It's truly great. But you are not just a wife. You are not just a homemaker. You are not just a mom, just a dad. Like, you have your sovereignty despite whatever vocation it is that you pursue. People just obviously kind of ask questions for small talk and expect, the everyday average person to be partnered up with someone or to have kids, right? So they ask questions about that, and people want to, know about that kind of thing. And I get it. I like to ask those questions sometimes too. But I always perceive it with such a deeper, more in-depth standpoint. And so I get that it can be sometimes very frustrating to feel out of the box and out of the in crowd, and like you're kind of not a part of that team. You're not, you don't really fit into any of these boxes. And I get it can kind of feel a little bit isolating. So if people ask you when you're getting married and when you're having kids, just let them ask you. Okay, just let them ask you. Understand where that is coming from in their mind and how they perceive their reality, what their worldview is. Understand where their perspective is coming from for them to ask that question, and just let it roll off your shoulders. Take no offense to it, and just kind of offer your own insight on it from a very neutral standpoint. Another thing too, I think people also do is that when sometimes I just was listening to a conversation earlier, and sometimes when people are talking about their more relationship life, right? Like having a partner or whatever, or being single, people think that they have to attach this kind of bitter energy and bitter tone when they say, oh no, I'm just going to be single. I'm not looking for that. I'm going to be single, right? They think that the only way that they can justify why they're single is to carry this bitter, resentful energy around them being single, and like why they're single, and that it's always the reason why they're single is because of the opposite sex, right? It literally does not have to be that way. You can remain neutral and say, yeah, I'm single. I just haven't found the right person yet. Or yeah, I'm not in a rush. I want to live my life, do my own thing. And when God says it's the right time for me to partner up with someone and become some man's wife, then I shall follow that calling, right? You can just simply state it like that. You don't have to be resentful about your choice in order to try to justify the reasons as to why you are remaining single, and that it's always the other person or the opposite sex's fault. I mean, literally in the Bible, the Apostle Paul says that it is better to remain single. But if you do not wish to remain single, then it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Which what he's talking about is it is better to get married rather than to fall into lust and sleep with someone outside of marriage. The Apostle Paul remained single and he was still giving relationship and marriage advice, okay? So for all of these people on here who go to all these dating and relationship coaches, including myself, and ask if they're single or if they're married, because if they're not, then they can't justify that they would know anything about being single or married or being in a relationship or how men and women think and behave and communicate. Anyways, they are just, it's absolute buffoonery. You know, there's always been this saying that goes, when women become financially successful and get more money, they start to have this mentality of, I don't need a man, right? And when men start to establish themselves financially and get more money, they begin to say, okay, well, now I have to find a wife to provide this money for, right? So do you see the distinction and how different the male versus female psychology is around that? So as I was saying, is that the more women move up in their career and independence and sovereignty and growing in their financial matters, the less that they feel that they really need a man in their life for companionship or to do anything for them or to be a provider for them, right? But on the opposite contrary, men start to adapt the opposite mentality that when they do become more successful, they want to provide their resources to women. And babe, my grandma, she met her last husband when she was in her 60s and he was 74 and they got married like within 6 months, okay? So never question if your age is a hindrance to your ability to find a provider man and get married, you know, later in age in life. And to my girlies who ask about school and, you know, going to college and whatnot, I personally I don't believe in going to school. I don't believe in going to college. Unless you are going into medicine, law, or something of that nature, then it's really not necessary to go to school. Or unless you have grants or loans or the government funds you to go to college or whatever, then I don't really believe in putting yourself into high debt to get the college experience and learn a trade or something that you may never end up using in the first place, okay? I mean, everything now has become so capitalized on. The basic skill of cooking and cleaning has literally become capitalized on. And I just don't believe in, you know, having to like go to school to learn how to do that. It's in your nature to take care and nurture a home. Cooking and cleaning, basic skill set. Like, I just think it's personally a waste of time and money, especially for those of you who do have to pay for it for yourself, you know, and going into debt and whatnot. If your situation is different, then that's great. But most of the time, you know, these young people are going into debt over it, and I think it's just so unnecessary. My sister, she goes to college, but it's all paid for. She got grants and loans and things of that nature, so she doesn't have to carry that burden later on in life, you know. But eventually she's going to end up getting married and have kids, and then she'll probably not use what she went to school for, or at least not for a long time, right? Because the truth of the matter is that you really can't pursue both. You can pursue both at different times, but you can't pursue a career and building a family life at the same time. It's not possible. What I always say on here is that you are either a career woman or you are a woman with a career. If you choose to be a career woman, then you better set your life up to where you're not a wife or a mom, okay? Because that you can only have one priority in that situation.